feedback's about the future. It's about helping you be successful. It's about helping you win.
Zapier has been remote since its inception in 2011 when it went through YC. The company now has over 300 employees. So Zapier's CEO, Wade Foster, knows a thing or two about how to run an all-remote company effectively. Therefore, welcome, Wade. Thanks for joining us today. Wade, the entire world has suddenly gone remote, and many CEOs are feeling lost in how to run their companies effectively. You've created this great guide, the ultimate guide to remote work, which we've linked below, which is a wiki for best practices. But there's a lot of info there, and it takes a long time to go through it fully. So Wade, would you be willing to, right off the bat, share with us what are the three most important things from that list that are also the least obvious to do?
Yeah, I think a few things. So, the least obvious one is the tricky thing. I think there is the first one I would cite is how you define values in your culture is really important. A lot of companies do this. So a lot of companies define values. That's not the sort of unexpected part of it. But I think the way that you bake them into how the company runs is perhaps unique. So when we set out, probably about 10 people, and started to think about scaling, one of the things we asked ourselves is, what makes somebody successful at Zapier, period? And certainly implied in that is they got to work remotely. Like, how do they work inside an organization that doesn't have an office? But it was more broad about just how are they successful at a company like ours. We came up with a whole list of stuff, traits, competencies, what have you, that are pretty generic. We weren't trying to say, like, this is what makes a good engineer. We were just trying to say, what makes someone good at this company? So they were meant to be somewhat, across role, agnostic of role. And there's a big long list, and we sort of narrowed it down to roughly 5 things that were fairly opinionated. It's, it would be reasonable to take the opposing stance. So for example, one of ours is default to action. We felt like that was really important in a remote organization because you don't have somebody who is sitting next to you, can see that you're stuck. And so it was really important for us to have folks who are self-starters, independently curious, and willing to dive in and just go solve a problem. Now, it's possible that you could take the opposite viewpoint of that. I think if you look at a company like Apple, for example, they have a culture that's very much oriented more towards perfection. Like, they really want things to be done very well and very high quality. I think they would look at a default to action thing and say, whoa, that's a little too chaotic. We're going to ship, products that are flawed in some way because of that, and be very successful. Versus you counter it with, say, like Amazon, which I think is maybe more oriented our direction. So the values have that sort of stance that it's like you could say the other way and probably still create a good company. And so we enumerated 5 of those. But then the key thing that I think we did is we baked it into the interview process. So as part of the hiring, we have questions that try and assess, do people have these skill sets? Do they have these competencies? Do they share these values with us? And then we baked it into the performance reviews of the company. So every 6 months you get reviewed against these things. Now, that is a really great start. But then what started to happen is it became more than just that. Like, over time, it became a thing that not just me, I was articulating, saying why these were important, but it became things that others in the company cared a lot about and would also start to call me out on certain things. Like, we have one that's default to transparency, and if they felt like I wasn't being transparent, you can bet I hear about it. If they feel like I'm, not taking feedback well, I hear about it. So that, I think, is when the values really become critical. And I think in a remote organization, it's hard to develop those things if you don't approach it with intentionality. You sort of just become, this odd collection of just individuals doing random assignments and work. And you really don't want that. In a company, you want people to feel like they're on a shared sense of purpose, shared sense of mission, shared sense of alignment. And the values for me have been one thing that have been really important in creating that.
Can you give us some examples of how you actually interview someone for being a self-starter?
Yeah, sure. So I think, a great question is, hey, tell me about a time when you spotted a problem at your last job, and what did you do about it? So you can hear, and tell me about a time is really just a great variant of a question. You can apply this to almost any type of thing you're trying to evaluate against. A sort of poor answer might be, hey, well, I spotted this bug and I escalated it to the proper channels, and, that was that. That's sort of like the bare minimum amount of work you can put in. It's not bad that you did that. It's just you really didn't do much beyond, you didn't try and solve it in any sort of way. Versus like maybe a good answer would be like, well, I spotted this bug, I wrote a quick fix and like committed that to the repo or something like that, and informed the team that they should take a look at it. That's better. Another one might be like, well, I spotted the bug, I realized that it was impacting it was like prevalent in other parts of the code base, and so I created a module that can replace all of these different things. That's even better. Like even then, like you could go even further and say like, I not only did that, but then I created I wrote up a thing and did a talk with all the engineers to help them understand how to deal with this type of situation. So you can sort of see escalating degrees of someone taking ownership of a problem there. And so those are the types of things that you're just trying to get that nuances. When you look at these situations, how far does a person go? How far do they try and push it? And when they sort of uncover a thing that seems worth working on.
Yeah, I mean, that makes total sense. We actually have the same company value, which is being a self-starter. And I think it's particularly important in remote environments, waiting for permission. You'll probably wait quite a while in a remote environment. So I think that's one value that lends itself pretty well to it. When you say people call you out, so this is something that I'm interested in, because I found it very difficult to elicit feedback from the rest of the company.
Yes.
And we have a feedback-driven culture. We try to have bi-directional feedback a clear bit. What we found is that although managers are fairly good at giving feedback to their reports, we don't get many situations where the reports are comfortable giving it to the feedback to the manager. Yeah. And I have maybe 3 or 4 people at the company that are willing to sit me down and give me brutal, raw feedback. But it's few and far between, and as the company's grown, it's become fewer people. And we found one of the ways that we've actually managed to elicit this feedback and get people to call you out is via anonymous feedback. And I'm wondering what your feedback system is, and if you have anything similar.
Yeah. So we have, one of our values is growth through feedback, and so it's baked into the values. So that's an important part of it. And so when you join Zapier, we have a whole onboarding program, but one of them is we teach a course on how to give feedback, and I actually am the one that teach the course. So, every 2 weeks I do an hour-long session, run through people the basics of feedback, and I think that sets a really good foundation for folks that shows, hey, I care a lot about this, so much so that I'm the one that's teaching this course in a company of 300 people. And it shows right away, you can give feedback to me, and if you can give feedback to me, you should be willing to give feedback to anyone. Now, that doesn't make it easy. And in fact, I still have the same problems that you have, that there's not many people in the company that will give me unabashed raw feedback, brutally. But it has gotten better once I started doing that. And then we've also implemented just other opportunities for folks to share. So, we have the employee reviews that are the employee survey that goes out, employee engagement survey that we use with Culture Amp, goes out twice a year. We do 360 feedback twice a year. So we have these different programs that sort of try and elicit. It's still tough. It's just uncomfortable for folks to give feedback to the CEO, because ultimately, their view of you is that you hold their fate in their hands, and they don't really want to jeopardize that. And I can understand that. I understand that fear. And so I do a few things. One is I just try to diminish the fear every chance I get. So if someone gives me feedback, my first reaction is thank you. And I don't say, I don't try and, debate them or convince them that they're wrong or anything like that. It's just thank you out the get-go. The other thing that I think I try and do is to get better feedback is I usually try not to ask feedback for my performance. How do you think I'm doing on the job? No one has feedback about that. They don't understand my job. They don't really want to talk about it in that way. but you can ask for other types of feedback on things that have happened in the company where you know, like, hey, I play a big role in this. So you can look at things and say, hey, how could we have done 2x better on this project? How can we make our culture 2 times more effective? How can we do things like that? And all of a sudden, the feedback gets very specific and very, and it's not saying, oh, Wade, that's your fault that this is the way that it is. But you know that it is, because who else would own that stuff? Like, of course it's your fault that those things aren't working as well as it is. So if you sort of ask questions in a more indirect way, you tend to get, I think, the feedback that's a little more rich that you're looking for.
And I love that. That's so smart. One of the things that we do at Clearbit is at our leadership offsites, we do, 180 feedback, where every executive gives feedback to every other executive, and we write it down in a Google Doc. And it's pretty raw. That's kind of the deal if you're on the exec team. And then what we do is we publish that document to the rest of the company. And I will publish all the critical feedback that people give me, and then I can really demonstrate, hey, actually, I view this as a gift, and this is an important part of learning. So I think feedback is definitely an important part of making remote work, and also having a set feedback time. I don't know if you have a scheduled time for doing feedback, like a regular routine every week, maybe every one-on-one. But we found that pretty helpful as well.
Yeah, I love the publishing, the transparency around yours. I think that's kind of stuff goes a long way to just demonstrate that, like, hey, I'm open to this. And I think one of the beautiful things about feedback's about the future. It's about helping you be successful. It's about helping you win. And so the best thing that you can do for yourself, whether you're a CEO or not, is show that you're a person who likes to get feedback and is good at getting feedback. Because if you can show that and prove that to others, all of a sudden they become way more likely to give it to you. I noticed this myself, like with the people that I work with day to day, the ones who take feedback really well, I'm just better at I can walk in, I can give it to them. I don't have to worry about their feelings as much. I can just say, like, hey, this is a thing that you need to work on, and, let's work on it together. And it's just a very sort of matter-of-fact thing. And those people tend to grow very quickly because they get more of it from me. And it's not because I want to give them more feedback than other people. I'd love to give it to others in the same way. They've just done such a good job of making it easy for me. Versus others where I know and I'm like, oh man, I have some feedback for them, but I got to think about how to deliver it. And I got to think about how they're going to take this. It's just easier for me to sometimes forget to actually do that work. It's like, oh, I have to digest this. I have to come up with the perfect language. And so they get less feedback. And so I think one of the most important things you can do as a CEO is just demonstrate, like, hey, lay it on me. I want to hear it all. I want to hear the good. I want to hear the bad. And I'm going to work on it.